Welcome everyone to this month's cozy OpenNTF webinar. My name is Jesse Gallagher. I'm here with Serdar, and we'll be going through a handful of developer topics and just kind of loose, and it's meant to be casual and fun. We're here in August. Everybody is on vacation, so it's going to be a mismatch of topics, and we're welcome to chat and questions. So as usual, we'll probably have a Q&A at the end, but fire anything off, and we hope to have an interesting time. We got some good topics. There are some good topics, so we'll kick this off. So as usual, we follow the same normal structure. We'll have the little welcome. You're probably familiar with the OpenNTF slides by now. Then we'll have our presentation in a couple parts, and then we'll have a general Q&A at the end. And of course, we always have to thank the OpenNTF sponsors. HCL made a large contribution that we're running on. So this is how we pay for things like these webinars. So, GoToMeeting is not free, and but it does do useful stuff for us, and that's how we pay for it. Things like some of the community interaction with Discord, helping run the organization generally. We try to run a tight ship, but again, not free. And this helps a lot. And then similarly, Prominent donates all of our IT services. So they host this stuff for us, they manage the servers, and while a lot of us run our own servers, it's all the nicer not to. And having to do that, again, this saves us a pretty penny, and it allows us to keep doing what we do. So that is we are very, very grateful for that. And next up is our general community slide, and I'm actually going to be kind of going a little more into this later, but I always like to remind people that we are all OpenNTF. We're all here to participate, and we learn from each other. We're all volunteers. We don't have any paid positions. Everybody's just here to learn things and help teach each other things, and at every level this is helpful. So no effort is too small. This goes from chatting in Discord is just generally your existence there, unless you're being a jerk, I guess. But generally your existence there is good. Like being part of the community, keeping things going, keeping things alive is helpful. But obviously things can get bigger from there. Like having a large project, if you have some ideas, like you're interested in, hey, would this be addable? Even if you personally don't know how to do it, just having the idea might be useful. Worst case, if you throw out an idea and somebody says this is actually too hard, well, now we know. But just having ideas, and especially whether or not you can pitch in. Obviously, being able to pitch in is great, but just asking things, spitballing, that sort of thing, is very helpful. And then if there's an existing project, even testing it, just using it is great. A lot of these projects that are up here are meant to scratch an itch of the person making it. And so, for example, a lot of the projects I work on, they do the stuff that I have done, but they don't necessarily do the stuff that I haven't done. So just using them and trying them out and kicking the tires and trying edge cases is helpful to keep these things mature and growing. Any guides or documentation, a lot of us are developers, and our documentation is generally very sparse. So anytime, if you have hey, I wrote up a page describing how to do this, that is fantastically helpful, because documentation is almost always at the bottom of the priority list. And then just generally reviews on projects, stars on snippets, that sort of thing. Just general participation is wonderful. And we have our Discord. I keep forgetting to put the URL on here, but if you're not on Discord already, you can snap this QR code or go to openntf.org/Discord. That will take you to an invitation page that will get you in. We greatly value that. It's a pretty regularly happening place. It's been a smashing success for us, and we are very pleased with how the Discord community has been working out. Next up, we have a couple upcoming events. So Let's Connect is happening on 2 days in October. So if you are in the area, in the Northern Europe, or willing to go there, it's bound to be a great time. So I know that it could probably be quite a kind of an expense, but it's generally these kinds of conferences are often worth it. And so if you can, definitely check that out. And then next webinar, we're doing a little shuffling for next month, so we'll figure that out. We'll announce it as usual around the start of the month. And then I figured I'd start mentioning around December, we're going to do our usual holiday hangouts. So this is just kind of loose Zoom or GoToMeeting, whatever we do, whatever platform, just hang out and chat and reminisce or talk about stuff you're doing. We usually have like 2 for different time zones. So it's just a nice time to sit around, have a drink, catch up with friends, meet new people. They're generally very enjoyable. So we'll be having those, and we'll announce, obviously, once we get into December, we'll announce specifics of dates and times for those. So we hope to see you all there. Now, logistics in GoToWebinar, you can ask questions. So depending on your layout of GoToWebinar, it'll either be a floating pane or there'll be a tab that you could go to. You can ask questions there. As always, we like to say, well, keep them on topic. Admittedly, this is broad, so feel free to ask whatever. There are certain things like, is HCO going to do X or Y? I don't know. Maybe. So help, keeping them a little on topic or keeping them something that we can reasonably answer is better. If there's something that's way off topic, this is another case for Discord. Feel free to go there and ask them there. We do have a lot of people. But for this presentation in particular, if you want to ask anything about dev, whatever, go for it. But yeah, we'll take a look at that probably during the presentation, but then answer them at the end, unless something seems pressing. Now, onto our presentation. So I'm going to give a little preamble thing about contribution. So here is a little intro to me. So I'm the CTO of a consulting company here. I know some guys. I'm also the IP manager at OpenNTF. I blog at prostilic.us, and I am available on your various ActivityPub platforms of choice at jesse@pub.prostilic.us, so Mastodon or any of the compatible ones. You can follow me there. That's my primary location nowadays. Now, the agenda. So if you were here last year, you will find the next couple of slides very familiar. I'm going to talk about open source involvement. This will be like kind of a whirlwind version of it because I did talk about it more at length last time. But then after that, I'll hand it off to Serdar to talk about Domino JNX in action. He's been doing some very neat stuff with that. And then after that, it'll be back to me with some general topics on the XPages JEE project, and then a neat little thing I did recently of taking actually what started as an XPages JEE project, moving it out of Domino, but then using Domino's new OIDC provider and DRAPI to do the same thing that I did with the app on Domino. I like that one because it's like a nice little clean example of a portable app where I wrote code that works on Domino in a nice way. It accesses Domino data, and then I move it to another server, but still accesses Domino data in essentially the same way. The same code works. There are just a couple little tweaks here and there, and it's a nice little setup where we're using some of the newest technology that is on Domino to keep accessing NSF data without actually having to, for one, use Designer, but then also without having to run your app on Domino. And then we'll have our little Q&A at the end. So open source involvement, I already did, essentially half of this in the OpenNTF community one, but I can never reiterate this enough. Almost anything helps. I mean, again, obviously, if you come in and you're a jerk or you're just like bleaching, it's not so good, but we don't really have that problem too much. Code contributions are great. Documentation contributions are great. Writing issues, answering issues, Discord chat, blog posts, videos. Like I will say, as somebody who maintains some projects, seeing blog posts or videos or presentations about those projects is immensely gratifying. Feels great. And it's also useful for me to see how other people are using stuff. It's useful for other people to it's more people talking about something, and that is hopefully good. And so that gets the word out. It helps a lot across the board. And really just any of this, just participating. And again, I think we're actually doing great on Discord, and so the more the merrier. And so just any of this, any involvement is very helpful. And so there's a couple ways to do that on OpenNTF. You can post snippets. These come through every once in a while, but these are a very lightweight thing to do. Like you don't have to have a full project with releases and life cycle and all that stuff. You can just make a snippet. Like I do that every once in a while. I'll be talking about one that I did later. You can create a full-on project. Sometimes that doesn't necessarily need to be something that you're going to maintain indefinitely. Like if it is a significant thing but is basically one and done, that's fine. Having that as a project is very useful. Posting on an existing project page is very useful. And then, as always, I keep harping on it, joining Discord, just general participation. We also have a lot of projects on GitHub. Presumably, we will soon have projects on other non-GitHub hosting providers soon for reasons. But GitHub is kind of the archetypical one, and other services work very similarly. uploading any of your code there. You can fork an existing project. And, if you're not familiar with the GitHub flow and Git and GitHub terminology like forks and PR, which is pull request, it is something to learn, admittedly. Like, it is a little more structured than just typing something in chat, but it's not as bad as you might think. But there are issues, just posting an issue saying, hey, I tried to do this. And, even if it turns out it's, working as designed or something like that, that's fine. Watching and starring repositories is just sort of nice. Like, it doesn't technically improve the code, but, people like to see that people like the stuff they're doing. And you can also follow or sponsor individual developers. So following is just, I like to see what this person is doing. Sponsor is, I like this so much and I want them to be able to keep doing it, so I will give them a little money. It's basically like a Patreon built into GitHub. And money is helpful. So it's always, that's always good. So if you see those buttons, by all means, use them. So this is a quick overview of forking and pull requests. So this is something that is best, if you're interested in this, it's probably useful to watch a video on this. But what I want to reiterate here is that while it is structured and a little intimidating, it's not actually that bad. Where you could and GitHub in particular makes it easy. You make a fork in your environment on GitHub. You can make a lot of changes. If it's just like, especially documentation, you can just do right from the website. You don't need to have the whole flow of bringing it down locally, making the change, and doing the commit. These GUIs will help you with that. And again, it's very intimidating at first, but it is expected and encouraged. Like, getting a pull request is how this most of the time happens. It's hard to go completely wrong. Like, if you make a pull request, but it's not, if it's not actually useful, or you change too many files or whatever, like, worst case, it doesn't break anything. You just have to tweak it. So you can't really go that wrong, because you can always just delete it and start over. Larger projects will have procedures and contribution guidelines. Like, for example, I made a contribution to an Eclipse project yesterday, actually. And that's one where they have, much like a lot of OpenNTF projects, a built-in check for, have you done a CLA? And I did, but had I not done that, I would have had to make sure I'm all set. And, you learn that. And then, it's always possible that you may make a contribution, but then the maintainers will say, oh, you need to do it differently or whatever. And while it's always possible that they will be jerks, usually they're not. Usually people like to see contributions. Usually it will go smoothly and everything will actually be fine. I do understand that it's intimidating, but it's actually not that bad, especially after you do your first one, and it's easy if you pick a nice, easy repository. If you look for OpenNTF GitHub on YouTube, there'll be a webinar about this. And there's actually one of the easiest ways that I've found to do this, and I've actually done this a couple times, is there are some HCL documentation repositories. And, while they are the canonical documentation, they are written by humans. So it's easy to have like typos and mistakes and stuff that you can fix. So a couple of times now I've been doing something with the C API and I noticed, oh, there's a typo here, or this is a little unclear, or like the function definition has changed over time, but the docs don't reflect it. Since these are just text files that are, you can just download this, make your change. These are actually really easy. You don't have to worry about the compilation step. You don't need to worry about running a test suite in a certain environment. You don't need to worry about most of this stuff. It's just text files with docs. So this has actually been a really pleasant way to kind of flex my contribution to somebody else's project muscles and do this. So if you find something in any of these documentation repositories that needs fixing, it's actually fairly easy and fairly smooth to do so. So these are actually a pretty good target for just kind of like getting your feet wet. Like, it's easy wins, low overhead. You don't have to worry about a lot of the stuff you may otherwise. So check these out. So I just really wanted to go over all this stuff of like, any contribution helps. Even though I do understand that it can be intimidating, it's not as bad as it may seem. And the person receiving the contribution pretty much all the time is thrilled to have it, and it's just better for the environment and the community all around. Like, the more stuff, the more people participating, the better. So now I will hand this over to Serdar for his portion of the presentation.
So hello everyone, and thanks again, Jesse. And I will speak about some Java stuff. And I'm taking a huge risk not to be understood by anyone. But anyway, we are in a very relaxed hour right now. I have been building OSGI plugins for Domino platform and on Eclipse for more than a decade. and it hasn't always been easy. The learning curve has been pretty steep, and you might probably know that. I mean, documentation is not exactly great. Most of the time, I had to figure things out by trial and error, or just by imitating other developers, people like Jesse, Paul, Tim, Nathan, of course, and also our friends, old friends from the IBM Ireland labs. Anyway, what I'd like to do today is to share how my approach to Java development on Domino has shifted over time. I called this session an experiment, but don't be misled with the word. Some of what I'll be talking about comes from real contracted work or that's running in production environment. So let's start with IntelliJ. Of course, I have been using Eclipse in most of my plugin projects in the past. But a few years ago, I stepped outside my comfort zone from the Domino world with a couple of pet projects, things like Python, Django, or a few other technologies. That gave me the chance to try different IDEs, like VS Code, of course, one of them. And also, it was really PyCharm or IntelliJ IDEA that made me rethink my relationship with Eclipse. And actually, don't get me wrong, Eclipse is a great piece of software. I mean, considering the price difference between $0 comparing like IntelliJ Ultimate, hundreds of dollars, and the feature set it offers, it's more than enough for most of the work. And of course, the biggest strength for us is that Eclipse itself is built on OSGI, so it comes with very handy plugin development perks like target platforms or PDE. But once you spend time with some alternatives, you start noticing things in Eclipse that you can't unsee anymore. And that happened to me in the first time I wrote code with PyCharm. And the first thing that hit me was the dark theme. I mean, real, proper dark theme. Eclipse has always struggled in that area, but the real game changer was probably the editing experience. From autocomplete to inspections, intentions, even AI integration right now, the code editor in IntelliJ IDEA or other JetBrains IDEs just feels miles ahead of Eclipse. And if you are developing complex web applications with a backend, IntelliJ is fantastic. It handles everything from runtime to test coverage really well. But once you step back into OSGI world, things start to get a little bit bumpy. Eclipse, on the other hand, is very comfortable with OSGI plugin development. After all, it's built on OSGI itself. It can replicate your runtime through target platforms. Projects in the workspace can easily depend on each other. It feels very natural, and it makes things so straightforward that many developers never pay attention to their manifest files, even though that's the really core of the project, because Eclipse handling that file. On top of that, Eclipse has a powerful PDE, which lets you test and debug plugins at runtime. And with OpenNTF XPages SDK project, you can even test or debug your plugins directly on Domino server without any effort. And IntelliJ doesn't come with any of this. No target platforms, no workspace, no PDE. Take the target platform, for instance. For me, that was a roadblock for quite a while. The target platform basically keeps all the required plugins ready for your project. And I couldn't figure out how to replicate that behavior in the IntelliJ. There's a plugin that tries to imitate Eclipse target platform, but it's slow, sluggish, and it creates a lot of temporary files, and it's not very Maven friendly. And Maven with Tycho does offer a way to define a target platform on the fly, but in IntelliJ IDEA, especially the free version, it just doesn't work smoothly. And that's when Jesse sparked the idea, sparked the light at the end of the tunnel. The main challenge in the OSGI is dependency management. OSGI relies on manifest files. Each plugin in its own isn't its own artifact, and even when one plugin wants to use another, that dependency has to be declared in the manifest. And some plugins are already available in the runtime. You don't have to provide everything, which is why Eclipse needs that target platform to know what's there and what's not. And Eclipse makes things quite easy because it maintains the manifest file for us. So most of the time, we don't even need to think about what's going on under the hood. Modern Java, though, takes a different approach. Dependencies are usually declared in a central place like Maven POM file or Gradle, whatever you use. You just list what you need, and Maven pulls the package into your project, into your computer, for instance. And compiler builds its class paths accordingly, and the build plugins in the Maven, for instance, handle the rest. This makes life so much easier because adding something like JSON or Apache Commons to the project is just a few lines of the code in the POM file. And more importantly, Maven supports packaging, deployment, full CI/CD pipelines. Consider you are working on a project with multiple developers. You spend no effort to build up a development platform in every computer. That's where Tycho comes in. Tycho is a Maven plugin that bridges the gap between OSGI and Maven. It lets you use the best of both worlds in the same project, keeping the manifest while managing the dependencies with Maven. I tried this a few times, but honestly, it's not a pleasant experience, especially on the Domino platform. Eclipse helps smoothing out some of the problems, but not all. But then I learned another way. Thanks to Jesse, instead of starting with OSGI, I built the project as a normal Maven project. I will show an example in a moment. And then use a bundler plugin to generate the OSGI manifest automatically. And that same plugin can collect all required jars into a single fat plugin suitable for an update site, and another plugin that can assemble the update site for deployment, and that's done. And I'll get all Maven advantages, and I'll get all OSGI stuff, and I'll be Eclipse free, Eclipse independent from Eclipse. But the target platform issue still remains. But if you look closely into projects, most Domino plugin projects don't require much on the full runtime. I mean, if you are not writing an OpenNTF Domino API project, you don't really need more than a couple of plugins from the Domino environment. Maybe a couple of servlet plugins, maybe a Java API plugin, Notes jar file. That's about it. If you are using Domino JNX, you won't even need the Java API, which brings a lot of complication to your OSGI projects, and it will be easier. So the trick is I treat the Domino runtime as a plugin repository, and I can create an update site from any nodes and Domino installation. I can do that. I have been able to do that for years, thanks to IBM and then OpenNTF project I'll talk about. And there's a Maven plugin that exposes those plugins as a Raven repository, and I can pull whatever I need into my project in the Maven. In a way, once we have pushed everything into Maven properly, the idea has nothing left to argue about. It just has to comply. The whole idea is that all the platform setup is living in the Maven, development, testing, production, whatever you need. That way, the IDE needs almost no special setup at all, except the personal preferences, of course. Meanwhile, I have also been getting myself familiar with Domino JNX. Anyone here who has ever used Java with Domino will know that what I mean when I say the classical Java API is, let's just say, depressing, they're frustrating, and it feels like it was written for Java 1.2 and then forgotten about that. I mean, forget modern Java features. You don't even get the basics like generics or enums, and don't get me started on whole recycle business. And on top of that, library only partly comes as a jar file, which makes it painful to use as an OSCI or Maven project. Anyway, I could rant about this all day, but you get the idea. So Domino JNX, on the other hand, Domino Next, Java Next, is the long-awaited refresh for that. ACI built JNX as a modern API, which with the implementation hooks directly into Domino C API with Java native access. In a way, you could say that it's evolved from Karstan's Domino JNA project. It's directly linked to Karstan's project, actually. HCL is already using JNX is in production. It's a key part of the Domino REST API product right now. So we can safely say JNX is here to stay. And it's really a step forward because it takes advantage of modern features we now take for granted in Java, like streams, like time package, like much more. And we call them modern, but they have been around like more than a decade right now. It's just the old API was so outdated, it warped our sense of modernity. But JNX also goes further than old API, like with improvements like detailed access to rich text records, which the old API never really covered properly. And best of all, no recycling. Let's see some examples now. I'll show 3 example apps today. One of them I will skip very easily, but just to show an old style application written in Maven. And first, a standalone application using JNX OpenNTF project database metadata export. And the second one is a rich text API, a Domino servlet application I have developed for SIT. It's a very nice servlet API for rich text conversion. And the last one will be LangChain4j plugin for Domino, my latest OpenNTF project for LLM integrations. So let's start to show the sample applications. Okay, first of all, metadata export application. I'll bring it up. That's yes. Okay. Easy example. This one isn't an OSGI project. It's just a simple standalone application running on my local workstation, completely outside of Domino. All it does is export the OpenNTF projects into a JSON file, also into a lightweight NSF at the same time. So I use this, let's say, templates very often, because whenever some customer asks me to export this database in JSON, in this format, in this platform, in Excel file, I don't mind, I don't bother writing an agent for that. I get the database into my local and I write Domino JNX agents on my local, working on my local machine, and give it a go. It's much better, it's much more efficient, especially the new JNX supports like streams, for instance. I can develop my agent in a way that it does parallel processing to export the database. It has JSON liner, JSON serializer, so it's very easy to export stuff into JSON, etc. Anyway, let's start with the POM. What is it? This is a straight, simple Maven. POM file pulls JNX project classes along with some utility libraries. So JNX normally has a couple of different packages. The API has the interface class. Actually, I don't need API to be explicitly written in dependencies because it's already a transient dependency of the JNA, but I wrote it to show that. JNA is the implementation, and for this project, I need JSON, JSONB package for the serializer. And here comes the biggest gain of my new development paradigm. Normally in the OSGI world, I would have needed the plugin versions of all these libraries like SOAP or Commons or whatever I am using. Or I would be downloading a pile of jar files plus their dependencies into my project. And consider I wrote this an agent, I have to import all these jar files into my agent. Now with Maven, it's just declaration. I just declare what I need, and that's it. That's the main advantage of using Maven. Let's come to the code, and let's go to the initialization. And yes, the first bit is initializing a Domino client. In the old paradigm, we would start with a session object, right? I mean, in JNX, we use Domino client. We start with a Domino client. And it's not the same. It's quite different from the session because in classical API, session is the mother of all objects. But in JNX, Domino client is just a gateway. And in this simple setup, we create a Domino client. It uses the locally installed Nodes client and its ID file to access. How does it know which one to use? Because I will give JNX access to NodeC API through the runtime configuration. I'll show in a couple of seconds. Since it's using the ID file on the client, it will normally prompt for the password, but I'm keeping my Nodes client already running in my background. By the way, I'm using Mac Nodes client in the background. It can simply use the active ID all the time. There's also functionality to switch ID if needed. Anyway, when I run this, there's a run configuration, which run configuration happens to be in the Eclipse as well. You might know that. But first thing you should notice here, I can select a different JDK for running. This is important because I am using IBM JDK Intel version because it has to be complying to the Java runtime of the Nodes Domino. It doesn't care which JDK I'm using in the compiling, but it's important to use the compatible one in the running. Also, we pass a couple of parameters here. They are going to be picked by the code. And the most important thing is I am passing some environment variables, and most important one is dyd library path. This is showing the nodes directory, so it can reach the nodes C API thanks to that. And there is a long story why this has to be set here instead of a central location. I explained that in a recent blog entry. I won't get it right now, but it has to be declared in the run configuration. Anyway, let's see how we use Domino client in this instance. First of all, we open database. we open the source database, we open the target database. And if target database does not exist, I can create the target database using, again, Domino client. And I can also use a resource file, NTF file, so I can create a new database from a template. And without encryption, I can set the title, I can play with the database after I create it. I also initialize a JSON serializer. It basically, the JNX comes with this JSON serializer. You can customize it further, but I am using just simple stuff like I'm defining which fields are going to be treated as Boolean, which values are going to be treated as Boolean value, and include items, etc., etc. Anyway, and export is exporting, it's not big deal, but import is important, because in import I am opening collection. Now, in JNX, views are called collections, and they are pretty much everything, every getter, opener, etc., null safe and return an optional. This is new for us, not new for Java world, for the Java world. Once we open a collection, we can run a lambda through for each document in the loop. And for each document, I check stuff and I create a metadata document in the target database and serialize the metadata document, created document into JSON. This metadata document creation is pretty much, replace item value, compute with form. It's very familiar, except I'm just checking here if the project was imported before using a collection as well as name, view. And if view is present, I am checking, I am making a query by key. And if I find any document previously existed, I find them and delete them. And as you see, we changed the structure. I mean, we are using Java in a more Java way right now. It's not like we are using Java as like lots script way, in a more Java way with all kinds of stuff. And also, another thing changes, the way we handle rich text fields. So in this project, I am taking the project document from the OpenNTF project database and export them as in a lightweight version as text and HTML. So I have to get the composite. If the rich text file is composite, I have to convert that to HTML. And Domino JNX provides me a simple HTML converter, which is being used as MIME. When you send the documents as a mail, that rich text in the same way converted to HTML in the external mail. This is the same one, called directly from API. And I'm getting HTML. I am using JSoup to create a text content from that HTML. It basically stripped every HTML elements and put into the target document. If my content is already MIME, which means created in the web, I can get the MIME reader, internal MIME reader of JNX, and read the MIME, and I can pull up the text and HTML parts as needed. And that's pretty much it. It's quite different from normal Java development, and personally, I would say it's more fun. Hey, that one was the first project. The second project, I included that just for as an example of an old style project, because I have been developing this project for many years in Eclipse. Then I switched that to IntelliJ IDEA very recently, and this is an interesting project. This is a Domino rich text API. So you might have seen our very own Heiko presenting this application as the Impresys Rich Text API from his company SIT. We actually developed this Rich Text API together back in COVID times, and the goal was to achieve a round-trip conversion, near 100% round-trip conversion between HTML and Domino Rich Text composite. So it takes HTML content, parse tags, creates a DXL, and save it to the rich text field. Or it works in reverse too. And unlike the standard rich text to HTML conversion of inherent conversion of the Domino, this one handles a wide range of cases, embedded image, multi-level bullet lists, inline attachments, and so on. By the way, I am currently cleaning up this code, and it will be opened as an OpenNTF project very soon. But let's now start with the POM. Okay, I defined 3 different repositories at the start. Repositories are the central stuff in the Maven. So every dependency are always pulled from the repositories. And by default, it has a global Maven central repository. Every dependencies are pulled from the central dependency, central repository. But we have an OpenNTF Maven repository as well, where we keep OpenNTF projects. I have declared twice here, one as repository, the other one is plugin repository, because I also use plugins from OpenNTF repository. I have also 2 different repositories here. One is Domino platform, and the other is logback update site. So these are P2 repos, and they are Eclipse style repositories, also known as update sites, which have a different structure than Maven. To use them, I have to use a P2 layout resolver plugin so Maven can recognize them. So the first one is Domino platform repo. This is a P2 update site generated earlier with the generate Domino update site project at OpenNTF. So it contains basically all installed features and plugins on nodes or Domino environments or Domino installation in P2 format. So we can use them just like we are using as a target platform. Okay. And the other one is pointing to my xlogback update site, which is an open source logging plugin for Domino OSGI I wrote like years ago. Since it's not published to Maven yet, I load it from a local directory. After defining repos, I list project dependencies, simple dependencies like I'm using Apache Commons metadata extractor, etc. Some of these dependencies are marked as provided because when we install this plugin on the Domino servers, these bundles will already be there. And tricky part now is the OSGI bundles here. So I am using these OSGI bundles. I defined them as provided again because I know they are already part of Domino server, my target platform. Okay, so bundles will be there, and I am calling them from the P2 repositories. For instance, OSGI framework is already provided as public repository in the public repository, but OSGI framework is needed for activator. Wing and servlet are needed to run servlets on Domino. Of course, we have OpenNTF Domino API because I am using ODA in this project, and it's coming from OpenNTF repository. And a couple of other stuff like traditional Nodes Java API and NAPI and HTTP register for registration, and also Jupyter for unit tests. Next, the manifest file. So far we ensure clean compilation. So far my project is going to be compiled well, because every class are in my class path. Everything is accessible to the compiler, no worries. But to run this on OSGI, I need the manifest file and firmly built jar bundle. So for this, I'm calling a Maven bundle plugin, which is a magnificent plugin. It builds the manifest file and it prepares a final jar bundle. So basically, I can export packages. Normally, export packages in manifest files doesn't accept asterisk, but the plugin can expand any wildcard into all available packages. And I declare my required bundles or import packages. These are used by the OSGI platform, so it can know whatever which bundles must exist for ours to load. Finally, the embedding step. This is the important step, because the problem is I included many packages, libraries like Apache Commons, like JSOAP, like metadata extractor. These are coming from Maven. OSGI doesn't know about Maven. It cannot run Maven. So we need them inside our bundle or accessible in the OSGI. So instead of converting them into OSGI bundles, I am embedding all compile time dependencies from the Maven into lib folder as jar files, and also they including their transitive dependencies. If those, for instance, if Apache Commons is using another Apache project, it brings that jar file as well into the output bundle. That's a neat feature. And once that's done, another Maven plugin to create my features, and another Maven plugin to create my update site, and I'm done. Let's test it on the fly, and I am running clean package task on Maven, and it starts compiling and then building the jar files. And if I want, I can run unit test at this point, but I'm skipping them. It's creating the bundle. Everything comes up like in 20 seconds, and voila. If I open the outputs from the targets and repository, let's open this in Finder. We will see my site XML, my update site, my feature, my plugin. If I open the plugin, I will see all my classes, and my classes in the lib folder. I'll see all my jar files, and I have a fully formed manifest file, and that's it. I can import this into my update site. I can run through on my Domino server, and nothing else needed. Okay, so that's the thing. And the third one is, I will keep it short, but LangChain for J for Domino. So let's see. This is a designer server. Sorry. Yes. This is a designer or server plugin project, normal plugin project, normal OpenNTF, normal plugin project written with Domino JNX. And this is an open source project. And I recently committed that. It brings support for a popular LLM library, LangChain for J, into Domino applications. So let's start with the main structure. I split this project into many modules for extensibility, for future extensibility, because LangChain 4J is a very large project. And I designed a core module first. Core module is simple. It's meant to be simple because it's designed to work standalone and it has no OSGI dependencies. It's important to another plugin, probably. That could be DOTS plugin, that could be XSP plugin, whatever. It just pulls classes pulls packages from LangChain and JNX, and that's it. And also a couple of maybe utility classes and test classes as well. And then it does nothing because manifest is handwritten, no need to build complicated stuff, and it's a simple jar file. The OSGI plugin, however, it's a little bit more complicated. The OSGI plugin is the XSP plugin file. It provides access to LangChain 4J from both designer and Domino server. So it gets the core module, re-export that. It gets the LangChain 4J classes and re-export them as well. So you can use the LangChain 4J stuff inside your designer and inside your Domino server thanks to this plugin. Here's an interesting bit though. This plugin, this POM file has no P2 repo involved. It's an OSGI plugin, but it has no P2 repo. Why? Because it only uses one class from Domino XSP, and for that we use a clever trick from Jesse. We import this. This is a stubs package containing empty versions of some frequently used XSP classes, like XSP library, which is needed to put our library inside the designer. Just the interfaces with the right method signatures, but no code. So this way, our compiler is basically fooled into thinking like library is there. At runtime, Domino fills the blanks. And for the plugin, we also generate a manifest here and in usual form and embed all the jar files. And it takes some time to build entire thing. It takes 1.5 minutes every time. Anyway, then another two modules for creating distribution package and the update site. I differentiated that in them into these different packages. But so far, it's like Eclipse, nothing different. But what about testing in IntelliJ? How do I install that into my development server? In Eclipse, we had XPages SDK, which could deploy plugins directly to the Domino server for testing or debugging. IntelliJ doesn't have PDE, so we can't do that in the same way. I looked at some generic OSGI approach in the IntelliJ, especially Ultimate version. The paid version has some tools for that, but in the end, I chose a more direct or simple route, which is a deployment script. Here's how it works. Let's see. I am deploying this to a remote server. So basically, normally it has to clean and create the package from the scratch, creating a full update site. I skipped that part because it takes some time. But right now, it's asking for my SSH authentication because it connects to my server over SSH, and my SSH keys are in 1Password. And it transfers the update files over SCP, and then it connects to Docker. It restarts HTTP server in the remote, and when the server comes back up, my new plugin is alive on this remote server. So that's the way I deployed my plugin when I want to test it. I can add a debugger as well, so I can use the debugger on the server as well, but it takes some time. Anyway, that is it. It's not that quite straightforward as it sounds, because a few moving parts needed to be in place. First of all, my Domino server, Maggie, is running downstairs in a Docker container inside the Linux VM on a Proxmox host. And I use SSH keys stored in my one password for secure access, so I can access my server over SSH, like SSH Maggie, and I'm in. So that connection has been built properly. I also built another thing. I have Docker in my local computer. I created a Docker context. Docker has context feature. So it knows whenever it wants to access Maggie, access to the Docker daemon running on Maggie, it can use the SSH endpoint. Again, over the SSH keys. So I can control the Docker in the remote. Okay. So the script then happens to be very simple. So the script does everything, every checks, and after that, it goes to the remote server, deleting old files. It transfers the files into the remote server. Then it runs Docker context and it restarts HTTP task, and then it opens a console console connection. That's the magic. Of course, the main drawback is the build time, since Maven packages everything from the scratch. Larger plugins like this one can take a minute or more to build before deployment. There are ways to optimize that, but anyway. And of course, in Eclipse, there wasn't any issue because PDE allows you to work on your classes directly. So PDE doesn't need to be built every time. You just restart your Domino server over HTTP and voila. Okay, so I hope some of these ideas give you something useful to take back. And for now, I'll hand things over to Jesse, and I'll be around at the end for any question, or feel free to shout out in the Discord channel, and we can continue our discussion there. Jesse?
Very neat, very neat. And speaking of questions, I will actually just preemptively answer one, because I see the question was, where does the JNX stuff come from? And the answer is that because JNX is open source, it is available in Maven Central, so it and all of its dependencies are just readily available in any Maven project. So all that stuff about generate Domino update site and wrapping all of the proprietary stuff, you don't need that if you're just targeting JNX. It's just available in Maven Central like any normal Maven dependency, which is one of the niceties. If you're dealing with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can forget all of the hurdles where, like, oh, there's no official repository for the XPages stuff, so we always we had to write these tools to make it palatable at all. Whereas like with JNX, it's just there. It's just a dependency. It's all normal. It's much nicer to deal with in that kind of project. All right, so I have a couple little topics here that I'll kind of go through at varying speeds. I'll start out with, I run a number of I think pretty useful open source projects, but the Jakarta EE project is the main one that I talk about lately, in part because it's kind of the cleanest win for a lot of the things that I do. Like, this is something where you can just add it to Designer and just your development gets better. Like, you get to write REST services better, you get to write beans better, you get to write data access better. And it's stuff that you can add to existing projects. You don't need to know Maven or anything at all, although that's useful, especially with some of my other projects for compiling ODPs and stuff. But this one's it's the easiest sell, I think, because it's basically just take development and make it better in place, and then it also makes it portable, as we'll show later. So it's up to version 3.4.0. This does require Domino 14 plus because the upstream specs require Java 11 and 17. And I would like to exhort everyone stop using Java 8. Java 8 is so old. We're in the same kind of position we were when Domino was stuck on Java 6 and Java 8 was a breath of fresh air. We're there again. Stop using it. Fortunately, Domino does have 2 releases that have, I think still the current LTS in 14.5. Domino is up to date. I know that it's a hurdle. I know that some things are difficult, but just make the jump. Please, please use new Domino versions. Please use new Java versions. Java 8 is old. Dependencies don't support it anymore. It's not just Jakarta. There's, in all sorts of projects, you'll see cases where it's like, well, we can't use this version of an upstream dependency because it requires Java 11 or whatever. Just please stop using Java 8. It's ancient. It's at this point bad. Stop using it. Anyway, back to this project. It uses Jakarta EE 11 as the baseline. So this is, and if you're not familiar with what Jakarta EE as a term is, it's the current version of Java EE, which is itself, a long-running product and environment and set of specs. It has been chugging along very nicely, getting regular updates lately. It's all open source, run by Eclipse. And Jakarta EE 11 is fairly new. It released, I think, earlier this year, and so the project uses that now. It has a lot of useful utilities. It has nice refinements. They're chugging along nicely. I've been making a lot of improvements to the Jakarta data and NoSQL drivers. So this is, the immediate thing I usually talk about is REST services and beans and things like that. But the NoSQL drivers let you do your Domino data access in an NSF without having to use lotus.domino or other database specific things. You just say, I have an entity like a person, first name, last name, job title, etc. You define that, and then you just say, create a new one, or load one by ID, or load one by name, and the driver takes care of all the rest. So you don't have to say, get document by UID. You don't have to say, open the people by first name, or probably not first name, people by last name view or whatever, and get by key. Like, you still can do that, but this just means you don't have to. It will take care of a lot of this. And then I've also recently added something that I'm generally calling Jakarta modules. And so module is the term used internally by the Java stack in Domino to refer to an encapsulated app. So if you've ever seen NSF component module anywhere in your stack in Java, that is what an XPages app is. So it takes an NSF and it treats it as this little web app. So Jakarta modules are me saying, you know what, I want to take this and get rid of the cruft and have more control over it. So these don't run XPages. They don't run, you can't access like a form. You can't access a view as a web page. You can still access view data, but it just says none of that. Treat it as a modern web application environment, which means that you get full control. Like, it starts when HTTP starts. So if you have something in your code that launches, say you're like preloading cache, that sort of thing, it just runs when HTTP starts. You can think of it as that XPages preload feature, but more reliable. It'll also run when HTTP ends, so you can terminate things. And same goes for requests and sessions. You can say whenever a request comes in, if you want to log it or something, you could just have a listener that will always run when a request comes in and when it ends, when the session starts and when it ends. So you have all these things that you don't get reliably in traditional XPages applications. You can kind of shim in, and I have tried a lot of shims. There are ways that you can kind of imply these events, but this way lets it have full control, like if you've ever done normal like Java web development with JEE or Spring or something. It's that kind of thing. You have full control of the URL path, so you don't have to have .nsf, you don't have to have XSP in there. So if you just have like, myserver.com/myapp, you can have anything after that. So your REST services, your pages, anything after that. You don't have to have any of these things. You don't have to use URL redirection and substitution rules. You don't have to like coordinate with names NSF for all this stuff. You just have it like a real application. So it is, it's cleaner, it's more, it's a nicer, more modern environment, and you get to / have to still use Designer to do it. But this is how I've been targeting a lot of my stuff, because I did this because I had a need for reliable, I wanted to have multi-threading containers that would start and stop properly, and reliable session tracking and things like that you just can't get normally. This will be much more reliable for that. And then it also provides a path for more features. Like I'm thinking I could just throw a WAR file in there. So WAR files are standard Java web apps. You'd throw them normally at something like OpenLiberty or Tomcat or something like that. But I could have Domino run these natively without an extra layer like I've had in the past. That could be potentially useful. I always want to add more to the NoSQL driver. I want to get it to the point where in even a complex application, you don't have to use lotus.domino anything at all. So there are certain cases, like there's additional like context in those classes now, like your like querying roles in a database and things like that, or seeing like has a database been modified since a certain time, things like that that are still useful in there. And I want to, as much as possible and as much as makes sense, bring that over. I'm going to be making fiddly performance tweaks. So for actually a couple clients recently, I've been using YourKit quite a lot, and it's an extremely satisfying process to point a profiler at a web request and look at what's taking up the most time and then making it faster. So I've been doing that with this project as well, where I saw these things where it's like, well, this takes 200 milliseconds. I could get that down to 25 milliseconds, which means that on every request, now there's 175 milliseconds that don't have to be spent, that sort of thing. It's tremendously satisfying. And I'm pointing it at this too, and so there'll be some of that in the next version. At some point, I want to do custom authentication, so we'll get to some of what that would mean later. But in theory, when you have at least some module types, you'd be able to authenticate with whatever, as opposed to whatever Domino's authentication gives you, which is pretty flexible, but per app authentication rules could be very interesting. And then also at some point I will move to microprofile telemetry. So there was a project earlier called microprofile metrics that it would let you see like how long your average REST service request would take, etc. That has been kicked out of the spec in favor of microprofile telemetry, which is meant to be more usable with other services. So if you have monitoring software, the goal will be to have your apps be more monitorable using those. And that'll be in there at some point. I currently don't have a lot of monitoring software, so it's not been a high priority for me, but I would like to get that in there and do that more. And before I get to the last and largest thing I want to talk about, I just want to have a little vignette here to just extol the virtues of local valid TLS certificates. And so what I mean by this is, I assume we all have a lot of this. Like in my house, I have a bunch of Domino servers, and I want to be able to connect to each of them, ideally with TLS, especially with a lot of the things like how Domino requires TLS natively for certain newer features, passkeys and all that sort of thing. Having that and having that be valid is huge, because historically I've made up my own local domain, and I've made up self-signed certificates, but that means like every time you have a new tool, you either have to say trust everything or give it the certificate and say trust this specific one. But what I've been doing lately is like, well, I have domains and I can just give a subdomain and have that be a valid one inside the house and not externally accessible. But that makes it tougher to get those TLS certificates. So normally if you're doing Let's Encrypt, it does HTTP-based verification where it will put like a file on the server, and then Let's Encrypt will call back to a URL saying, hey, do I have this file that I expect to see on the server? Which works great for a single server that is accessible to Let's Encrypt's environment. But in your own house, you don't want to have to like punch open a hole for every URL that you might be getting to on your local stuff. That's annoying and less secure. Because if you don't need that server accessible publicly, then don't make it accessible publicly. But you can use DNS-based authentication, which is Let's Encrypt will say, okay, for you, I want to see that you own this domain, so put this text record in the domain, which is public, and it will validate that. And if it accepts that, it will give you a wildcard certificate, or optionally a wildcard certificate. And then you can use that. And so I've set up Domino Certificate Manager to have wildcard certificates for a valid home subdomain. It only works in my house, but these are now valid TLS certificates. So I don't have to say on curl, I don't have to do -- secure. I don't have to make keychains for everything and say trust this one certificate, because these are all valid using Let's Encrypt's actual certificate authorities. So Domino Cert Manager can do this. Other things like I have my PFSense router gets one too, just for itself, so I don't have to have the browser trust it. So Domino Certificate Manager, it knows about a couple by default. Every DNS provider is different, unfortunately. I found mine, the one I use, isn't natively supported, but you can do a custom one, and it can be a little fiddly because, again, it's all different, but I got it working, and so now I just have my Domino servers in here. We'll periodically get a new certificate, and then they'll notice it, and a couple of them are allowed to access it. It works great. So I just have constantly rolling DNS-based certificates, and they work great. They're all valid. It's wonderful. So if you have local servers, look into this. It will save you a lot of hassle. And it's just so much more pleasant than having to make local fake self-signed certificates all the time. It's just much, much nicer. Now, I'm going to show a demo of kind of a couple things that I've been doing lately put together. And this is not necessarily something that you will have a use for right now, but I think it's a good example of the things that you can do and will be useful in the future. And it shows some of the new features of Domino. So it shows using the Domino REST API, and it also shows some of the value of if you write Jakarta EE-based apps, how you can use them externally. So Domino 14.5 added an OIDC provider. If you're not familiar with OIDC, it's OpenID Connect, and it's essentially, I'm sure I'm using the wrong terms to a certain extent, but it is essentially open SSO that anything can opt into. That's the main thing that you need to know about it. So you may have done SSO stuff in the past, a single sign-on, for example, between Domino and WebSphere with LTPA, which is IBM's proprietary shared token system. OIDC is sort of like that. It serves that purpose. There's a lot going on, but it serves that purpose of, I have an app and I want to use a generic system for logging in. I don't want to have every app have to have its own user registry or connect to the same LDAP server. For line of business apps, there are some security benefits of OIDC, like the fact that your app never needs to know the password. It's admittedly a little less important for a business app because it's inside your company. Knowing your password is not as severe as like Facebook knowing your password or vice versa. But it's still nice that only the provider server actually gets any of that stuff, and it works with the same flow and all that. So an OIDC provider, you may have used Keycloak or Azure Active Directory or other similar things like that. Domino's OIDC provider is not as featureful. Keycloak is much, much more featureful than you generally need, and it also does SAML. The Domino's provider will do the general job of, I want to authenticate using my existing Domino server in a way that will work across different tools. So this will allow access to Domino itself. If you have another Domino server, another Domino site, it allows access to the Domino REST API, which uses JWT, which is the underlying part of OIDC generally, and third-party apps. So I will be showing the latter two, but you could also use this if you were writing apps like in an NSF and you wanted to access those. Domino's OIDC will naturally work with that as well, and you could pick and choose and mix and match as you want. So the way this is going to work in the client app is using because I will never talk about anything other than JEE, a standalone Jakarta EE application using the Jakarta security spec, which is one of the things that I may want to add into the Domino project, but it's difficult there. But in standalone servers, this works. So it allows you to, in your app, say how it's going to do its authentication. Originally, this had like HTTP basic and form-based session auth. They've recently, a couple of years ago, added support for OIDC. So you can define in your application, I want to use OIDC for authentication. And actually, let me skip ahead a little. Where was it? Maybe I missed the slide. I don't know. It's in here somewhere. But anyway, there's a way you configure this, and you say, I'm going to point to this provider. I'm going to use this, and these are OIDC terms, client ID and client secret. And this will tell the container, in my case here, Open Liberty, but also like Glassfish and other Java EE servers will do this. What will happen is that if you make a request to something that requires authentication, kind of like how on Domino, if you go to a page that, like an NSF that doesn't allow anonymous, it will show you a login screen. So if you go to a page in your app that requires authentication, it will say, okay, what's my mechanism? It will see OIDC. it will send you over to that server. You will do your login, and it will send you back, and now you are authenticated with that. So we will see a quick little video I have of that later. And this does it kind of like there's some stuff in between the servers talking to each other in addition to your browser going back and forth. So there's some back channel stuff that goes on that allows all of this stuff to work. There's one note that I had to make here. Because Domino tokens that the OIDC provider don't have group info into them, generally this stuff in a Jakarta app is based on groups or roles. Here you just say, if I'm logged in at all, just call it users. You may want to expand on this. There's some additional things you can do with Domino tokens, but this is just, we're going to map this. I wanted to put this here because if you end up following along with my code at all later, and it's on GitHub, I want to have this mentioned here. This is an important aspect of it. And then there's going to be, again, this is fiddly specifics, but when you define a allowed client for OIDC, so on the Domino server, if you've ever set up the provider, you say this one acts as a provider, and then you list the clients that are allowed to connect, which can have different rules. They have different secrets. You can do different things with those. But one of the things you have to specify is a legal URL that the browser will be sent back to. So this is a generic servlet that will act as that kind of that callback URL. So if you've ever done OIDC stuff, this becomes familiar as something that would need to be implemented. So a server doing this authentication, this OIDC flow, has some Java side context, so it knows, oh, this was the one that was originally requested. So this way, when a user goes to my app / super secure endpoint, they will come back to that afterwards. They don't always just have to go back to the main page. So this is just a nice to have, so that you go to the login and are sent back to whatever you were about to access. That's just a nicety. You always want that. So this is some examples of how you can set this up on Domino. If you follow the Domino OIDC provider documentation, this will look very similar. I just wanted to make sure I included stuff that does work with this case. And I feel comfortable having my client secret here because if you break into my house and you use this to access my example applications, good on you, but I'm not too worried about that kind of about that case. I found in when working with this client secret post as the authentication method, there's a couple ways to do that. That one works great. Audience can be anything. You'll have to match it later, but so for some uses, it's useful to have a URL. It's sometimes if you're doing ID Vault stuff, there's specific formulations for that. It doesn't matter as long as it's consistent. For Jakarta security currently, make PKCE optional, unfortunately. PKCE is something that's primarily meant for making it so that in a case where you're giving your full app to somebody, like a mobile app or a web page, this keeps things more secure than you'd be able to do otherwise. Having the kind of server-to-server back channel makes this less important. It's still good. Obviously more security is better, even if it's less required and less urgent. It's a shame that I found, at least with Open Liberty, you had to do this. This is something you can try if you're doing different servers. But I had to note here, unfortunately, turn this off. It's not the end of the world. It's not as important as it is with other kinds of apps, but here, this is something you have to do. The IDP cat NSF will yell at you for this. It's fine-ish. So that's just something to know. And then on Domino, so what we're doing here is Domino is acting as both the provider and then also consuming those tokens. And Domino by default will not just trust itself for this, which is good because you may not always want that. So you also need to configure Domino in IDPCat to trust its own tokens. So this is whether you have one server or several servers. The Domino REST API will use this configuration, the native Domino thing, which is nice because it shares some cache and shares some logic. So you want to configure, in addition to setting up this is an allowed client, then you want to, in the same NSF in another view, say, I am the client now, and I want to trust this provider. So you want to configure this so Domino will now trust itself. So it may be in my case, it is 2 different servers physically. You can do it with 2 different website documents on the same Domino server as well. And here, you want to make sure in names NSF that you have at least one website document that's set to allow JWT. So the Domino internal call will check this, and if there's no website mapped to the server running DRAPI, even though we're not using Domino HTTP, the internal call references these documents. So there needs to be at least one mapped to that for it to work. And now configuring DRAPI. So in your config JSON, there's a typo here. In your config JSON, you specify the OIDC IDP cat type. So IDP cat being just named after the NSF that does this. So this will tell it to use Domino's native OIDC support. So you don't have to provide everything here. Again, this is where audience has to match, but it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's consistent. And then you specify a scope that on the other screenshot, the provider was configured to dispense. DRAPI has this $data scope that means give me access to everything that I as a user am allowed to have access to. Depending on your configuration, you may instead make this like to-do app or something and just narrow it to a specific scope. But it's generally this formulation. And I'll clean up these typos before I post the slide somewhere, I think. Then there's the actual task of configuring DRAPI for your scope and schema. I'm not going to go over that here because that would take another 20 minutes, and I don't want to do that. So follow tutorials for configuring DRAPI for actually making your apps accessible via the admin UI. Now, as an example app, and this is on GitHub to look at, I a couple of years ago did a presentation on 4 ways to do a to-do app in Jakarta EE, the XPages Jakarta EE project. So I took one of those, the MVC one, any of them would work except for the XPages one. I took that, and then all of the app code is almost identical between them. I tweaked a little bit, partly to clean it up, and there were some references to XSP specifically in the URLs. I cleaned all that up, but the stuff about accessing data, accessing like the actual rendering of the page on the JSP was almost identical between these two, which is one of the benefits of the XPages JEE project, which is that if you ever want to run your apps on not Domino, that code is way more portable than any XSP markup, any SSJS, anything that's targeting the Domino Java stuff. It's so much easier to bring your app from place to place. Even if, like in this case, you're still accessing Domino data. Like I'm using DRAPI, and so I'm still accessing the same NSF data, but now I can run the app elsewhere. And that is way more portable than anything you're going to get using the actual, like the recommended XPages stuff, which is one of the reasons why I say use XPages JEE. It's not just better, it's also, it has a longer life, I would say. It's more useful elsewhere. It's more adaptable to other workflows and other servers. I mentioned that this repository has an in-development driver for DRAPI using Jakarta data. So the goal here is that this driver, I mentioned my custom NoSQL driver in the main project. This is a DRAPI version of that. So the same Domino repository and @view entries and @view documents, those all still work. Not everything works because some things don't apply and some are just not implemented, but it's meant to be that you can take your same, like even with the custom Domino extensions, and use that with DRAPI. So there's some things that will work in the future and don't work now, but in general, it's meant to be if you're doing, find person by last name or whatever, that will work the same exact way. It's going to know about that. It's going to be able to do view queries for you. And so it's adapted to the DRAPI API instead of using the local Lotus.Domino stuff. So in an NSF, you don't actually have to provide this because there's a default one, but you can provide a context saying, I want to read from names NSF or whatever. Here, you provide your DRAPI server URL, your data source name, and then the token that you get. So here it's saying, here's an example of that where I have a configuration property outside the app that's here's my server API name, here's the base URI, and then the OpenID context. So I mentioned again, when you're using Jakarta security, you have this contextual object. And so I could say, give me the access token. So I log into OpenLiberty, I get a token from Domino, the OIDC provider, that counts as my access token for OpenLiberty, but then that's also a valid access token for DRAPI. So I have logged into both, and here's, now we have SSO, where like now my server can access DRAPI on behalf of me without knowing anything about, my server never, like the app server never knows my password. It doesn't know anything about Domino. It doesn't know anything about any of that, but it knows I have a token that will be valid for this other server as well. So if this token is configured to allow both uses, which not all of them have to be, but when they are, you get to do this neat extra feature of now I can access the backend data using the same token I'm using to log in because it's configured that way. And so that can be really handy and nice and smooth, so you don't have to have a second login to get to your Domino stuff. You don't have to have 2 layers or like configuring an access token ahead of time or anything like that. And so it's a nice and smooth experience. And so you have, if you've ever done any MVC stuff in the JEE project, it uses these REST service types. And then this @roles allowed, which also works on Domino, by the way. @roles allowed means that if you're trying to access this at all, the server will enforce access control so that you're sure to be logged in by this point, which means you don't have to check, if the user's anonymous, don't try to query the data or whatever. Like, it's enforced by the server. And again, this also works in NSFs, which is handy. And then just a very quick video of this in action. So you can see I click around here, I do my little login flow, and then I'm sent back to the app. And then now I see in this beautiful application, this is NSF data. I can create a new one. I can see here's the filters, and then you can see some here's information about the token, which is nice and all. But the core part is that you see this login flow in action. So here it's my localhost app. I'm sent over to my authentication server in my house, and then I go through this flow. So all of this is this is the Domino login page. If I had a passkey configured for this, which I will eventually, that would work too. If I had OTP stuff, since this is just using the Domino login process, it uses all that. My app doesn't have to know anything about any of that. All it's saying is go to this server, do whatever you need to do there, get a token, and then come back here. And so now I'm logged in, and then it does, it gets this information, like it sees my Domino DN, it sees here's the audience, all that stuff. But that allows me access to all of this, and this is accessing now my actual NSF data via DRAPI using the same token. And so this is not running on Domino, but it's accessing actually 2 Domino servers during this whole process. And it's nice and smooth. Again, same code that I had in an NSF before, except now it's running cleanly over here. And it's just neat to get this working. So part of why I wanted to do this was to have these slides as a reference. Once I clean them up, they'll be all the more useful. And then presumably this will also be useful as a general example of configuring access with Domino IDC provider and DRAPI, which will be, that'll help flesh out the documentation there too. But I just enjoyed doing this. It was neat seeing, a lot of the stuff I'm working on pay off, like all the stuff like making apps in JEE in an NSF. Now I can make them external. I can access data the same way. I wrote the driver over there. I can make this driver here, access the data the same way. And it's just neat seeing, it's nice seeing a plan come together. And it's just been very satisfying. It's good to see, and it's nice seeing all this stuff that's adaptable now into the future onto whatever server I want to run. Most of my stuff still runs on Domino, but this makes it easier to run stuff not on Domino while still accessing the same data. So I don't have to migrate all the data. I don't have to do all that. I can have the same app code and actual data, so that makes it all the nicer. Obviously you have to plan for this, but then it pays off. All right, so that leads us to general questions. Technically we only have 2 minutes left on the schedule. If we end up with a lot more questions, I'm fine staying around, or if not, we'll end it on time. But I do see we did have one more point about, it was when I was yelling at everybody to use Java newer than 11, or Java newer than 8. And so this is a question about so what does that involve? Do you have to recompile all your applications? No. So the hurdle between going from Java 8 to Java 11 or 17 or 21 is not that you have, Java 21 will run Java 8 code just fine. As Serdar mentioned, the Notes API feels like it was designed for Java 1.2. It would run that code just fine too. The trouble is that Java is almost always very backwards compatible, but there were some changes after 8 where they said, you know what, we need to make a clean break on some parts once. And so we're doing it now. And so that means that there are a few places where Java code will execute, but then hit trouble. So some of it is from the core Java environment. Some of it is from changes to the JVM. So whenever there's been a new Domino version, I do a Notes in Domino 14 Fallout post. So if you check my blog, there are some examples of this. So for example, there used to be different ways to get to base 64 encoding and that changed over different versions. So if you use the old way, you have to be aware of the new way. There used to be, sometimes there's some things with edge case, like security algorithm things that are in one JVM and not another. But just generally, like if your code is normal, like XPages code or normal Java code with dependencies, that will still work unless it happens to run afoul of some of the few things that changed. So you don't have to go back to every single one and compile, but you do need to go back and test them on a new server. So you should still check. The smaller your app, the less likely you're going to run into stuff. But there were like a handful of kind of received wisdoms things that percolated into the community that people did, like accessing different XML parsers and things that ended up causing trouble. But normal apps, totally fine, will run unchanged. But there is always a chance that you will hit something that worked before because of some implementation detail that technically we shouldn't have been doing, but did make some sort of sense at the time. That now breaks. So you don't have to go back to every app. You don't have to open them in Designer, but you would need to check them. But it is worth it, especially because there's no going back.
Yeah, my experience with 8 to 17, for instance, mostly around libraries I have been using, because the clear cut about, I mean, many libraries made that clear cut at around 11. So many libraries stopped supporting Java 8 right now. Many open source projects as well. For instance, LangChain 4j immediately transitioned into Java 17, just like one night, because lots of stuff are not happening correctly in the Java 8, and that clean break is making it more difficult to write compatible code between different JDKs.
Yeah.
So the libraries are getting away from JDK.
And that does go both ways too. So one of the time, it could be that your code that works on Java 8 would also work on 21, but then a library you were using was doing something. In that case, that's the time to upgrade that library. There's also a lot of stuff where if you were doing it, like for example, if you were using Apache HTTP client or another similar HTTP client, after Java 9, there is an actually good built-in java.net.http client already. So if you have code using one of those other ones and you move, this is obviously work, you'd have to implement it. But if you're using a third-party library, there are also versions of HTTP client from Apache that do work on new ones. Like it still works just fine, but this is an opportunity to get rid of some code. Like if you were using these dependencies, you don't have to anymore. Like they're just new features. But if your code is as is, there's a very high chance it will work just fine. And then if it doesn't work, it's very likely to be one of the things that are on my blog. So check there, or it's something that somebody else will have run into. So, check Stack Overflow. So you do need to check, but you don't necessarily need to change your applications. You may have to, but it's not guaranteed. And it is worth it. Again, it's very worth it, and especially because there's never going to be a new version of Java that is 8. So there's never going to be a new version of Domino that is before 14. So there's no going back. You got to do it eventually. So it's worth it to do it. The sooner the better. Like one of the reasons why things got a little difficult on Domino to move from 8 is that they waited a long time. And so because of that delay, that's why 6 to 8 was painful, because it dragged out so long. So if you keep your code steady with current versions, each migration is going to be less painful than the last. And so you won't have this giant hurdle of I'm going several major versions up like you would now. But again, it's worth it. There's no going back, and it is better. And the more you get used to new Java features, the happier you're going to be.
We have another question from Bob again. I think he's asking about client to 14. That's good. He thinks that he gotta be real careful not to upgrade on the client. Yeah.
So that one, I think they worked out the 64-bit Lotus script thing. That I'm not an authority on that, so check on that. There was something, I think, in the 1202 64-bit client.
Yeah, probably.
I think that's better now. I'm not sure. The main thing, if you are using Designer 14 or above and targeting an old, a legacy Domino version like that, I mentioned one of my posts again. If you in Designer, if you right click on the NSF and go to project properties, if you set the Java compiler there to target 1.8, and in particular there's a dash dash release option you can set, then that NSF, no matter when you open it, will be compiled for Java 8, and the release one will mean that you can't accidentally use newer Java APIs from the core JDK. So all the fun stuff like the HTTP client, it will yell at you if you try to use that and you're targeting Java 8. So you do want to make sure to check that. You can also set your general project, your default workspace target to 1.8. The way the installer works is that if you upgraded Designer from 12 to 14, it will be 1.8 by default, but it's still good to check that. Ideally, setting it per NSF is actually best because it's actually a good mental check just to establish the baseline of what you're expecting. But you don't you can use Domino 14 to target Domino 12 or Designer 14 to target Domino 12. You just have to make sure you're not accidentally compiling to a newer Java release. And I also saw there was another.
You can use the code compliance, but of course there are lots of problems. I mean, recently I tried downporting Java 17 to Java 8 for a client, and it was nasty. Like a lot of stuff are changed in the Java 17, especially if you are dealing with serverless stuff. I mean, they are basically rewritten.
Yeah, well, especially once you get used to some of the Java 17 and 21 features, it can also just be hard to go back. Like Serdar, so in your code you had the if this instance of and then new variable name, like that inline type casting is so handy and it's just so much nicer, and you get used to that, and then like switch expressions and stuff. But I do see that there's another question about with the Jakarta REST API and Pure, so.
That's the elephant in the room, right? I mean,
yeah.
Can we drop the designer?
Yeah, so there's two things that there's two ways to go around that. So when I was talking about pure design Jakarta as in Jakarta modules, those are still done in Designer. But the idea is, that is you get benefits in your application and it is a pure experience. But then the to-do app I showed here is a Maven-based classic pure standard Java stuff app. So I happen to use Eclipse for that. You could use IntelliJ. You could use VI if you wanted to, but you can use whatever you want. And so that means not using Designer. And the benefit of that is that other IDEs are generally more stable and they have better features. Designer, some versions are more stable than others. It does, I do use it most of the day for better or for worse. It's it gets by, but it's buggy, and it's also just limited. Even the latest Designer is still based on Eclipse 2023-12, which it doesn't support. For example, the CSS editor doesn't know about. I always forget the name of it, but where you can put cascaded rules within a single rule. So you'd say body, and then within that you'd say body A or whatever. That feature works because it's just text, but it doesn't know about it, and it doesn't know about certain new JavaScript things. And maybe in 14.5, 14.6 or whatever, maybe that will be added. I don't know though. But whereas if you just use Eclipse now, you use the current Eclipse version. If you use IntelliJ now, you use the current IntelliJ version, and those are constantly upgraded. They're also nicer. You get to use them on a Mac and Linux without having to use a VM or a remote desktop. You get better features. There's a lot of niceties. Just IntelliJ has always had amazing code inspection things, and they'll say oh, there's a new update for this dependency or things like that. And so if you're writing your apps that way, and then either you're running them locally in Tomcat or OpenLiberty or whatever, and then using DRAPI, that means now you don't have any Domino weird dependencies at all. You don't have to use Designer. You don't have to use weird APIs. You just everything is modern. Yeah. And so if you see any example of code, you can just do that rather than trying to shoehorn it in.
I think we need to underline this part a little bit more, because you are underlining this every session you have, but it gets to more underlined, because there are two approaches to this problem, what applications we are writing. Because the first problem is, are you using Domino API, any Domino API, or not, because when you are using JNX, you are writing your code for Domino. So if you replace that Domino with Mongo in a near future, it won't work because it's completely written for Domino. So you can do many stuff. It will be more flexible for your every needs, etc. You can play with the rich text components, composite structure, etc. But you are writing that code in Domino if you are using Domino JNX. If you are using Jakarta and NoSQL package, you are not developing your application against Domino. You are developing a JSP application, you are developing a NoSQL applications, and you are dealing with a generic application. That needs to be like underlined 100 times because that's changing your application completely, and depending on the structure, one way or another might be better or worse. But it needs to be like think about that, thought about that every time.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I like using this framework is that it's writing the apps, whether you're doing it in design or outside, is better than the older ways, but then also more portable both for where you're running your application and then, should the day come, how you're accessing your data and like how it's stored.
Yeah.
And it just makes this stuff a lot smoother, and you can conceptualize your app better. You get better tools. Like, so if you're writing apps using Maven, there's just more tools that will work with that. Like if you want to, it's just all sorts of things. Like there's so many Maven plugins. Like if you want to publish your documentation along with it, etc. Like there's just things that know about these tool sets that don't know about Domino applications and never will. And so it's just much nicer. I see there was one last question. Will the to-do app be published? Yes, it already is. So that's the URL is in somewhere in here. It's in my GitHub profile. So if you see that, it'll be my most recent repository. And that's, I probably should add a README to it, just explaining what it is for future reference. But it's, it's there and it works. If you'd have to configure it, change your DRAPI server and your OIDC server and, configure it for your environment, but it should work. And it's just a nice example of here's how you using pure modern stuff, but still accessing Domino data in the same way that you can do with my other project running it on Domino. All right. So, Serdar, do you have any last words?
Nope. That's all. I think that two different cases was pretty much. It should be pretty much useful when modernizing Java-based applications towards Domino.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very happy with my design upgrade because IntelliJ is such a fun. It's such a fun to write with.
Yeah, I haven't switched over to IntelliJ. Like I've tried it a couple times, and I really love the stuff that it does well. It does really well, and there's a lot of stuff. My brain is so Eclipse focused, but like IntelliJ is really nice, and also the fact that you can have your choice of IDE. Like you could use VS Code or again just text editors or whatever you want to do is very nice as well. So all right, so thank you everybody for attending and for participating, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.